I think there are some narratives that we actually kind of put into society, right? If you think about happiness going down, we've seen in the last decade plus some years that the use of smartphones, social media, things like that, over reliance and interaction on technology often leads to us being unsatisfied and less happy. And so, how are we supposed to spin a narrative to the people who are so caught up in the right now moment to talk about a different future of what AI is going to be able to do and make us happier by not having to do stuff? You know what I mean? It's an interesting dichotomy.
Right. Well, we won't have to, do the stuff we don't want to do, right? There's what gives you energy and what takes energy away. And like paying bills, I don't know, anyone's like, oh, sweet, let me go get the mail. It's paying bills time. Like, it doesn't give us energy. We don't want to do that, right? So if AI can pay all our bills and, balance our budget and, give us a salary, so to speak, or dole out our own money back to us to make sure we don't get into, debt or financial ruin, I think we'd be okay with that, right? As long as it enables us to do what we want to do. We don't want to pay the bills, right? We don't want to have to take out the trash. There's a lot of things. I mean, that robot that can change baby diapers, boy, man, that thing's going to go off the shelves, right?
Oh,
We
yeah.
don't want to do that work. It's not fun.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. Now, today's going to be an amazing conversation because we're joined by Todd Marks, who is the president, CEO, and founder of Grub Technologies. Now, today's conversation is going to be all about innovation, as you guys know on the podcast. We talk about innovation in technology, mindset, and I also want to talk to Todd about how his career has innovated. So, Todd, one thing that I know is back in the 90s, you were a high school teacher. But you're now founder, president, CEO of an amazing organization. How does somebody make that jump across the chasm leap like that, man?
Yeah, well, actually, being a high school teacher was an ends to a mean. So at the time, I had aspired to be a climbing instructor and a kayaker and a canoe tripper, and I went into teaching because we had summers off. And but then the internet happened. Actually, the internet happened when I was in college, but the .com happened in '99, and one of my kayaking friends at the time showed me what was originally Future Splash and became Macromedia Flash. And I thought that was the coolest thing and a great tool for making online e-learning. So I quit teaching, waited tables at night, and started my first internet company back then in '99.
Dude, what were the people in your life saying at that point in 99, right? You're a high school teacher, you're a climber, you're a kayaker. Now we're going to start an internet company. Like, what was the kind of the internal conversations that you were having to talk about the future?
Well, let's think here. So at the time, my fiance didn't care as long as I paid the bills. She knew I was very entrepreneurial, and she was a kayaker at the time too. So, the fact that I wanted to start a business with my other kayaking partner at the time just, seemed okay then. And, I was young and didn't have, I had an apartment to pay for and, later bought a townhouse, but I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. So it was a good time to try some things.
I want to fast forward to building MindGrub. And so today you have your global team, over 200 team members, but obviously it didn't always start that way. What did the early days of building the company look like?
Well, the early days, it was challenging. So after this first company with a friend of mine, after September 11th, we went our separate ways. We didn't really have the capital to stay in business, and the market went a little soft. But then I started 2001, 2002. I started MindGrub, and at the time, I was making arrival and departure screens for a prime company that made airport systems, and it was just myself. They kept giving me 2-week contracts, and I really wanted to get a second person. I'm like, hey, I have this guy that I didn't really have at the point, but can I get a second person on the contract? And they're like, well, sure, show me resumes. And I'm like, I don't even know. I don't have a resume, right? I would have had to make it up. So it was myself for a number of years as an independent contractor. I was in and out of jobs, sometimes full time, dropping back to MindGrub, being an entrepreneur, and then finally the market got disruptive enough in 2008. So up to that point, I had some contractors. If I'd get a kind of my side hustle making websites, if I'd get a decent enough website, I'd be able to hire a couple contractors. But finally in 2008 is when it all came together. Apple released the iPhone SDK. I literally had my 10 years, 10,000 hours. I graduated college in '98. And then I had a real need. So I was working in Chicago at the time, working for Motorola, and it was a terrible winter and I wanted to be back in Maryland, and the iPhone SDK came out, which was massive disruption. So I was able to really hire people at that point and really grow MindGrub around making mobile apps. And I went from 1 to 2 then.
My question is when the SDK drops, right? What does your intuition tell you about the future, right? Software development kit drops. We're going to be able to build mobile now on this platform. Everybody and their mom has an iPhone, or in the future is going to. So you kind of saw the total addressable market just exploding in front of you, and you were like, we need to hook into this whale. Or what were your kind of thoughts there?
No, you're exactly right. So in 2005, Windows Mobile came out, and I had another partner at the time. I had MindGrub, and it was really my side hustle, my freelancing gig, in and out of jobs. I had a partner that also saw the potential for mobile. So we created a company in 2005 around Windows Mobile, but that platform didn't take off, right? And Windows Mobile at the time you could buy a third-party dongle and you could get location. And so we bought this dongle. We started a company called ViaPlace, which provided location-based services. We built the first app. We loaded the data, and we went to our town to say, we're going to walk up this street and we're going to get information delivered to the phone based on our geographic location. And we're like, this is going to be amazing. It's revolutionary. Well, the problem was it thought we were like a mile up the street. So the GPS was so wildly inaccurate that, it wasn't going to be the case. Now, the iPhone came out, I believe it actually came out in 2007, and it had location. And the location was pretty accurate. It would really tell you like what building you were standing in. As long as you were in the middle of like New York City, where there was a lot of, metal kind of confusing the signals, it was pretty darn accurate. So then in 2008, when they announced the SDK, I remember it vividly. I was on my way to work. It was a terrible winter day. And I've embellished a little bit, but I say like I was standing next to a curb and a cab goes by and splashes me with ice cold water in Chicago and all that. But I'm reading that they released the SDK. And I did walk in and I quit that day. I just knew that the fact that they had accurate location, and I had tried to do this 3 years earlier on Windows, and the platform didn't work out. I knew that it was going to be a thing with the iPhone. So that's really what gave me my rocket fuel.
Where do you think you develop some of this trust in yourself to make the leap and quit the job? Not everyone finds the confidence within themselves to say, hey, I'm going to go at it alone and cut ties and burn the boat, so to speak. So what do you feel really prompted you to do that?
It was actually the opposite for me. It was not wanting to work for somebody else. I was always a very independent thinker, and as a kayaker and a climber, it's always about the first like ascent or the first descent. And you just get used to wanting, because on a river, like every water level is different. And, here we have the Potomac River, which has great falls, and it tends to flood. And at 10 feet, you're standing there with, the dew on the ground, and you're looking at 3 or 4 other kayakers. You're like, all right, this is flood conditions. Have you done this? No, but I hear it's a great ride. I haven't either. All right, let's do this. And you're jumping in flood waters, and what normally might take 30 minutes to go down, in 2 minutes, you rush through this entire, it's really like a chasm and the Potomac River. It's got cliffs on either side, and there's no getting out. And some of these waves and these holes are just bus size, like man eaters, like huge. But you navigate the waters, and, whether it's 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet, it's very different. So you just get used to, the classic metaphor is building the plane on the way down. As an entrepreneur, but somehow you have to have had that experience prior. And I did get it through outdoor sports. Again, the first descent or the first ascent. And I just didn't love working for other people. So, I think that combination plus the disruption in the market and the real need to be back to my family, was the catalyst to make me do it.
It's like that Tony Robbins saying, right? Is the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change. And you were like, I just got to get out of here, and kind of rolled the dice for me. One of my other favorite entrepreneurs is Russell Brunson. And he talks about, there's a select few in the brotherhood who have built companies who didn't cheat by raising outside capital, right? And kind of getting the fuel, if you will, to kind of get this thing off the ground. I know that you bootstrap MindGrub for 20 plus years without outside capital. So how did you kind of come to that decision? Was it control? Was it, I just don't want to be diluted? Or what were you thinking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like we all had parents, right? And your parents are like, hey, you go to the movies, let me give you $5 and you can get some popcorn or something. That $5 is $5 of control, right? So then all of a sudden it's like, well, now you got to be home at 10, no drinking, you can't stay out late, right? It's anytime you get money, there are strings attached. And so I just never loved like the thought of, having somebody, have any control over me. So, I didn't take money. That said, I have seen people leverage capital beautifully. And so, I'm not discouraging anybody from taking capital. I've seen it, been an albatross as well, but, certainly product companies, if you're going to be a product company, and you want to get sufficient market share, I mean, it's a highly competitive market. You absolutely need capital. I don't think you can successfully bootstrap product, but I was a services company, right? So I just need that next client and I got the money coming in.
So you have a particular eye. We talked about stumbling upon the SDK. And so you have a particular eye for disruption. With this new wave of AI coming through and people getting really excited and hyped about it, what are some of the things that excite you about AI or potential use cases?
Well, everything. I mean, the primary use case, like it's even changing today, but you got to think of it as a whole. So like I travel a lot and, luckily I'm always awake. So it's not like I have to set an alarm, but most people have to set an alarm. It's super cold here. It's actually supposed to snow here again tomorrow. And so you got to warm your car up. You got to drive yourself to the airport. You got to figure out where's your gate. If you're a Starbucks drinker, you need your Starbies. You got to go wait in line and get a Starbucks. Like everything is very like manual. Well, in the future, my alarm clock's going to actually speak to my car, right? And then my phones are going to actually speak to my closet and figure out what I'm wearing. Maybe it already, my humanoid robot already packed my bag for me. My refrigerator already figured out what I want to eat for the morning, right? And my lunch is packed. And as my car drives me to the airport and drops me off, my phone's already giving me walking directions to the gate. It pre-ordered my Starbucks. As I'm walking by, they have my name and they shout and I grab my Starbucks, right? Like, there was a book a long time ago called Don't Make Me Think, right? And as far as like the mundane aspects of our lives, ordering things, inventorying the refrigerator, grocery shopping, what to wear, like a lot of those mundane things are going to be automated through AI. And that's what I'm excited about, right? I really want to do the strategic thinking. I want to, advance humanity, but I don't want to have to worry about what I wear or where my gate is or pre-ordering my Starbucks, right? I want that stuff taken care of. So, but in every industry, AI is coming for them, right? And even in the physical world, it's gonna disrupt digital technology first, right? Like knowledge workers, particularly those that sit at a computer, and even today, if you just copy information here and paste that there's plenty of automation programs. But the reason there's still a human doing it is because there's a little bit of knowledge work needed, in copying and knowing exactly where to paste, right? But AI is just going to absolutely replace that, right? Because it's AI is even going to be more intelligent at doing very narrow things than humans, right? It's that general intelligence that's going to take a while. But the amount of work being done in humanoid robots now, and the world, by the way, is created for humans. So humanoid robots are going to be the ones that take over, right? As opposed to like, Roombas that, vacuum or, it's the R2D2 versus C3PO, right? Like there's going to be way more C3POs than R2D2s, but needless to say, with all the humanoid robots, then eventually that'll come for the physical jobs too. But like, HVAC, electric, and plumbing, they're going to be the last to be, I think, displaced. But the knowledge workers, we're going to be the first, especially in commoditized areas like, website creation. That we're already working on prompt-based website tools so that you can sit down with a client, have a conversation much like we are, and just describe what you want on a website and then hit enter. That's like the only keystroke. Actually, you probably don't even say enter. Be like, all right, AI, that's a wrap. Give us our website now.
It's interesting. Dante, you have a saying about 30 linear steps versus exponential steps. Can you share that with the audience real quick?
Yeah, it's if you take 30 linear steps, you're obviously at 30. But if you take 30 exponential steps, you're at 1 billion. And the thing with artificial intelligence is we're in the very early stages, infancy, but we can see a world where this thing becomes exponential really quickly as artificial intelligence starts feeding back onto itself and training itself. And we're already seeing that by large companies like OpenAI and some of the stuff that they're building.
I mean, over the last couple of weeks as well, we saw DeepSeek come out from,
Right.
China and Asia, and people talked about the inference level of being able to basically just duplicate weights and I would say parameters of these systems and being able to duplicate. I saw like a news article the other day that said over the couple of weeks in which DeepSeek kind of was released, it improved itself in speed by 200%. And so when we think about how this technology, like Dante said, is compounding upon itself to make improvements on itself and just the use cases are going to explode, what do you say to all the people out there who say, I mean, like AI is out there, but we really shouldn't be paying attention to it? Doesn't that seem like a very naive mindset as we kind of move into 25, 26, 27?
Oh, sure. It's absolutely naive. And they're the haters. So, there's two camps. There's people that are like, it's going to change the world. I already have my, my GPTs that I've created. I've got 30 of them and I created 5 more yesterday. And there's people who are like, no, AI's the devil. Didn't you see Terminator? Right.
Yeah.
So, there's two camps, those that embrace it and those that are going to, be replaced by it. When you talk about like, cycles, it's actually a really important concept. And one of the analogies I use is one of the major ski slopes, they have to make snow, right? And to make snow, you have to know which way the weather is coming. So, say the weather is coming from the west, you want to point the cannons toward the east at quite the right angle and with enough pressure that the water is going to have enough time that it turns to snow and blows where you want it to, right? So you have to angle the snow guns and, account for the right amount of pressure per weather pattern. So you could spend 10 years and over those course of those 10 years being, a mechanic with these snow guns, you would learn which way to point them and, how to adjust them to maximize snow, right? And as a human, you'd get your 10,000 hours, 10 years. Well, these days you create a digital twin of your ski slope, right? And that digital twin, instead of waiting 10 years to encounter every weather pattern, depending on how much compute power you have, in minutes, you could run 100 years of weather patterns in that digital twin. So now that same agent, instead of learning about how to do something in 10 years, in minutes can get 100 years of experience. So we're starting to see, like, when you look at DeepSeek, that, and by the way, they did with DeepSeek, they said, well, it only took 5 million, what took OpenAI 500 million, right? But, the more you peel back the layers, you find out that it probably cost them 500 million too, right? And
Yeah,
they have slightly older NVIDIA chips, but they're still using NVIDIA chips, right? Like, I think they're like, oh, it was like an Apple IIe and they spent $5 and it outpaced OpenAI. It wasn't quite that amazing. Actually, NVIDIA doesn't need to worry about their stock quite so much. But absolutely. So it's that, was it not Stephen Hawking's, but another futurist essentially looked at the computational acceleration based on, they actually look at the chip size goes down, it like doubles in computation for half the cost every year or something, right? It's that exponential curve of computation. Well, now because of that, we're getting this exponential curve to the acceleration of knowledge. So, there's some really cool, Ray Kurzweil. That's who was, that futurist who really looked at that doubling of computation for half the cost. So it's inevitable every year it's going to cost less and less and less to get more computational power. But AI is going to ride on that coattail and it's going to be really impressive what it can do.
Where do you think, putting your futurist hat on, Todd, what do you think that places humans in the next, by 2030? There was a study by McKinsey that said by the year 2030, between 500 million to 800 million jobs are going to be replaced by automation or AI. Yeah. But in that same vein,
we like to say displaced, so we don't scare people so much.
Unhoused.
They'll still have unhoused. They're just unhoused. Right? They're unjobbed. They're
going to unjob 580 million people.
Actually, we're onto something here. I think there's one country that has it right, and that's like Bhutan. They don't measure their GDP; they measure their GDH. gross domestic happiness.
Ugh.
That's how they
Nice.
think they're doing right. So no, even Sam Altman had a study. He gave a lot of money to look at universal basic income.
Basic income. Yep.
And what he found is it might have made people more happy, granted, but as far as those individuals contributing to GDP, why would they? They're like, I have
Right.
basic income, I'm good. I don't need to produce things anymore. So, yeah, AI is going to displace a lot of humans. And, there's something to be said for, if you want to make a phone call, there used to be people, switchboard operators that would literally have to be like, okay, he wants to talk to him, and then we're going to plug him in
Yeah.
here, and right, and then it's not like they're just sitting around still wondering what they can plug in. Like they got other jobs. So hopefully we can displace humans, but at some point there won't be a lot of jobs left that AI can't do, and so we're going to have to shift from a focus on production of GDP to really just happiness, which frankly I think in the last couple of years happiness is actually going down. Well, production, albeit, might be going up. Happiness goes down. So, what really is the end goal?
I mean, I think that's a really good question to ask, right? I mean, because I think there are some narratives that we actually kind of put into society, right? If you think about happiness going down, we've seen in the last decade plus some years that the use of smartphones, social media, things like that, over reliance and interaction on technology often leads to us being unsatisfied and less happy. And so how are we supposed to spin a narrative to the people who are so caught up in the right now moment to talk about a different future of what AI is going to be able to do and make us happier by not having to do stuff? You know what I mean? It's an interesting dichotomy.
Right. Well, we won't have to, do the stuff we don't want to do, right? There's what gives you energy and what takes energy away. And like paying bills, I don't know, anyone's like, oh, sweet, let me go get the mail. It's paying bills time. Like, it doesn't give us energy. We don't want to do that, right? So if AI can pay all our bills and, balance our budget and, give us a salary, so to speak, or dole out our own money back to us to make sure we don't get into, debt or financial ruin, I think we'd be okay with that, right? As long as we can still, it enables us to do what we want to do. We don't want to pay the bills, right? We don't want to have to take out the trash. There's a lot of things. I mean, that robot that can change baby diapers, boy, man, that thing's going to go off the shelves, right? We don't want to do that work. It's not fun.
But there's also an element of like personal accountability in this, right? Me and Dante have talked about this on the podcast before. So what happens when the society is so ingrained with technology that you don't have to do the things that make you unhappy, but people are still unhappy? So it's like, what responsibility do we have to actually pursue the things that make us happy rather than casting away the responsibility, saying it's society, it's my job, it's the community, it's the town, it's the government. You know what I mean? It seems like there's going to be a technological savior, if you will, that's going to take it all away from you. And then we're going to be standing there bare skin and being like, oh, well, this is actually on me. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's nature and nurture, right? So the fact remains that, like, humans are somewhat problem solvers, and they are also, gluttons, and they kind of want to go for happiness and pleasure. If left to our own devices, we probably would seek pleasure and happiness. The issue is that society does create the unhappiness. And you look at even our education system, it's a 160-year-old model that was based on the Industrial Revolution, especially public schools, was meant to make factory workers. So the whole structure of education and workforce was meant for the factory owners to have people who could work on the factory floor. And I don't know about you, but I don't think factory floor owners have ever been happy, right? That's like every movie out there about the factory worker, the 9 to 5, which became more that corporate setting, is not a fun existence, right? And now, granted, as a business owner, it's way more difficult than, just working on the factory floor. Like, there's a lot of stressors, but you have this sort of, independence that I think does bring you more happiness ultimately, being able to kind of, be subject to your own, sort of whims, I think gives you a sense of peace and happiness instead of having to work for somebody else. So ultimately, I think, we need to rechange education, and we need to focus on not making factory workers and not teaching like, the classical 4 academics, math, science, history and English, I think we need to focus on career pathing, entrepreneurship. These days, how to be an influencer, but that'll probably change too. And then traditional academics plus sustainability, because we also with our boomers we built up a ton of infrastructure that is going to be really hard to maintain in the future. So I think we have to completely revamp education, and then we can focus on happiness starting from prenatal even into kindergarten versus focusing on creating factory floor workers. And I think by creating a new society and a new structure and the new ideals, then I think people can be happy despite technology doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You meant, go ahead, Kenan.
I was gonna say, I just get worried when you pointed out so succinctly. It's like all of our future leaders and future thought makers and movers and shakers are coming through a system that was designed for a world 160 years ago. And so it's like, is it a changing of the guard where the new generation is going to come in and the older thought mind is going to kind of leave? That's kind of going to give us that foundation to actually have exponential improvement in these type of things? Or can we expect for the old guard to have a change of mindset that actually can lead us there? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I mean, there's always, disruption happens, but I mean, there is unlike public schools, private schools, you'll notice there is this, talk of business and running things and entrepreneurship. They want to be the managers. They want to be the bosses a little bit more. Not that we wouldn't in public school. And I went to public school myself, but it's a little bit more regimented and there's not a lot of focus on entrepreneurship in public school. Well, so if you look at people who run the country, they were either career politicians, so they've been part of that machine, or like our current president, business owners, and they've run businesses and they've been very entrepreneurial. So, and look at somebody like, Musk, who's both genius and, I don't know, batshit crazy. Can I say that? But
yeah, of course.
I mean, like he's all over the map, but man, he's got some wild ideas. And so you do see leaders that are highly disruptive, right? And they're not maintaining the status quo. So, I think you either get that status quo or you at some point, like it's a pendulum and the pendulum swings both ways. I don't know that it's ever going to rest in the middle because we're not happy when we're at rest as humans. We actually like conflict and overcoming that conflict. It's in our nature. So, I think there's always going to be disruption and we're always going to continue to, move in the direction of disruption. But I think ultimately our value system does keep getting stronger and stronger. And we have to keep focusing on what is that, long-term value system that even if the pendulum swings, back in the other direction of more conservative beliefs for a little bit, ultimately one step back, two steps forward, and our value system will, continue to evolve and persist.
I'd like to go back a little bit. You had made a statement a little bit tongue in cheek, and you said in school we should be learning how to become influencers. One big theme, especially for leaders and founders, is founder-led marketing, and the leader being more present on social media and online, speaking their truth, speaking their values, speaking about the mission and vision of the company. What's your kind of take on being more front and center for the organization and coming on mediums like podcasts and things like that and speaking about your thoughts and beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you hear a lot of business leaders. They say, "Well, I'm really an introvert," but then they're life of the party, or they're the one shaking all the hands at a networking event. It's out of necessity, and so it used to be that news was like Walter Cronkite behind a desk, and everyone tuned in, at 6:00 and watched the news, and then it went digital, and people would go to their HuffingtonPost.com or their CNN and watch the news that way. Well, now, as long as, we don't boot TikTok, it's TikTok or Insta Reels where people are getting their news. They're getting their education content. They're getting their information, and they're getting it predominantly from influencers. So today's influencer was yesterday's Walter Cronkite. And if you want to deliver the news, if you want to be a subject matter expert or a thought leader, then you have to get in front of people where they're viewing. And so you have to get out there. And as much as I'm not personally on TikTok and I don't put things on Insta Reels, but I tell myself, I'm like, I need to get out there. I need to do it. And maybe this year we'll make that leap. But I'm at least I got some content on YouTube and I do podcasts. But it's, it's important. That's how the world works these days.
Do you almost feel like it's the antidote for all the automation and other things that we've seen since the pandemic? Email, cold emails, DMs. You can tell that like you're getting hit up by like random people and bots and things like that. So almost like the human connection and building trust through content from a leader of an organization is kind of like that secret pill to get people to actually buy into your story.
I think people like a good story. And I'm seeing now a lot of like Instagram pages that are entirely bots. And a lot of it is like clothing selection, so they have bots and they're putting clothes on those bots and then monetizing it by, both getting the viewership and then recommending clothing and stuff. And, millions of people are looking at bots and they're okay with that too. Even though the SAG was like, this is terrible, AI can't come for our jobs. Well, they are going to come for their jobs. I mean, video is getting incredible with AI these days. And I think people are okay with it being, I mean, look at animation, right? Animation is not humans, but it's the story they want. It's that story of that cartoon that's compelling. It's, and that's what Hollywood is. It's storytelling, whether they're using, humans or otherwise. I think we like real too. Part of that story needs to be real and authentic, but it doesn't necessarily need to be human. But that said, as we move toward, GDH and AI starts to automate a lot of the things we don't want to do, humanity is going to get a surge. Because I think as the pendulum goes both ways, I think we're okay hearing that story from animation or hearing it from AI generated images. But then there'll be some blowback against that, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Well, that step back, all of a sudden you're going to see, people that are like, I'm 100% human. I've got no droid, right? And there'll be restaurants that are like, no droids allowed, right? It's just by cyborgs or anything, right? So there'll be that, it'll happen that, people will push back on technology. I mean, there's whole areas in this world that don't use technology. I mean, right here in Pennsylvania, we have the Amish, and they still have a very basic, basic livelihood. Now, the interesting thing is like, it works, but they have their own issues too, right? With healthcare and some other issues. So I don't know. I don't know if they're generally happier than we are, but that would be the study, right? If we're talking about can technology make us happier, or is it ultimately make us more depressed, right? The jury's out on that. But I think we'll have to study like the Amish and, a couple of, tribes down in South America and see if they're truly happier or not. Because I don't know that they are.
So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is, as an entrepreneur, you've had to be incredibly adaptive throughout your career. You've had to pivot. You've had to push the chips all in. I want to know how you've been able to build and scale the business, right, in this new virtual world that we're living on the other side of the pandemic. So what are some of the things that you could kind of share as far as your secret sauce to building teams, being able to still be an effective leader through this digital world when we don't hold down offices every single day?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we were entirely Baltimore, DC, pre-COVID, and now we're spread out all over the U.S. With our kind of our employee talent, and then we have overseas teams, Colombia, Croatia, a few in Brazil, and we've created this supply chain. And the reason we did is when COVID hit, it became obvious that the world got real flat, and because before my clients had the high touch, we'd meet in person. We go break bread together, and they're like, "Oh, I would never trade this for working overseas, right?" But as soon as COVID hit and we're all on Zoom, well, why would you pay us that much more if we're on Zoom here and you can get your same Zoom experience with somebody, in Asia, right, at a fraction of the cost, with maybe half the quality, right? And quality is not your sticky point, then yeah, it became obvious that the world was going to get pretty flat and it was going to all be about supply chain. And so, we had to play the game. And so we, added some lower cost nearshore and offshore resources. We've focused on, of the commoditized service lines that we have, how can we automate those? How can we optimize our process? How can we automate them? How can we get to the same output in a fraction of the time, right? Just like the computing power we talked about, or the doubling and halving of computational power. Human capital is kind of like a fixed quantity. It's like the hour, right? But the thing is, we have to, in any commoditized business, quality has to go up and cost has to go down. So we have to be able to produce the same output in less time than we did before. So, MindGrub really embraced a lot of those principles. Like what changed? We're looking at our processes constantly. We went and focused on supply chain versus all being in a physical office. We're entirely, virtual. We do have some office space, but we became like Slack power users, right? All of that. But, ultimately, I do give a lot of credit to pivoting. We were using Rockefeller Habits. We pivoted to EOS, which is Entrepreneurial Operating System. And it does a really good job of creating a functional diagram of your business and figuring out exactly what the key performance indicators are at each part of that business. And then they do what's called right person, right seat. Then you put somebody in that seat and you're like, welcome to your part of the business. Here's what you have to do. And here's exactly how we're going to measure you between 3 and 5 KPIs on a daily basis. Right. So it doesn't matter if we're spread out. I don't have to, be popping in somebody's office, giving them impromptu one-on-ones. Right. Instead, I can just, hold them to a KPI, and then from there it's issue resolution. So if everything's humming and going great, it's going great. But if any of those KPIs, they're what's called off target, right? And then you have a quick conversation. They're like, oh, I'll be back on target next week. But if they're off target, then it's what's the issue? And if what's the issue, what's the solution? And then solutions become either to-dos or rocks, which are you can do it in a week or you can do it in a quarter. And so it's this great structure that now we can scale without having to be physically present. Like that was the one thing. We had entirely digital systems. And for a short period of time, like we actually did construction. They were doing construction above us and they encased our entire server room in concrete. And so we were out of commission for a week. It was no big deal. But I said, I never want to be dependent on a physical office space. And so I assumed I had gotten there pre-COVID and we did a pretty good job. But I realized it's those water cooler conversations to solve problems. That was the one thing that is harder to do digitally, because you just go into the water cooler and you're like, oh yeah, I was thinking about this Monday. It's Wednesday. I want to run this by you. Well, in the digital world, you have to schedule a Zoom meeting, sit on a Zoom, and like, as organic interactions aren't quite there. But, we've been able to figure that out through a process of communications.
Have you guys ever considered just like an open office room, right? I know there are platforms out there called like accountability buddies where you basically just sit on Zoom together as everybody works on the individual tasks.
Yeah.
And it does create that opportunity just to be like, hey, Dante, or hey, Todd, I was actually just thinking about this yesterday. I want to run this idea by you. You know what I mean? As everybody's still in the same digital space.
I think if you had like a pretty consistent team throughout the day, I think that could absolutely work. We took it one step further and we created the whole Mindverse. So we actually recreated our entire office. But then the coolest thing is like one painting you can walk through and it becomes like a virtual garden. And then we were building out like at the top of our office, which actually there's another floor above us in the real world, but we were putting a staircase there. And I told him, I said, and we started bringing our clients into this office, but I said, I want the rocket ship experience so that basically when you're on Zoom, right, we're just talking video and it's pretty lame. But instead, you would go to our virtual office, you'd get in the rocket ship, and then we would both be strapped in the rocket ship. And then when the rocket ship launches, what you're seeing on Zoom instead is the dashboard of the rocket ship, and you're going around the planets. And so there's this experience of going around planets. But meanwhile, we're sitting side by side flying this rocket ship, right? And so you can also see like a reflection of the person you're talking to. So you get to have a shared experience. And then, by the way, if I want to do a capabilities brief, I'll be like, I can throw that up on the dashboard of the rocket ship, right? So we made this virtual world. The issue is there was only a little bit of a barrier to entry, right? Like it wasn't quite as easy. Like Zoom, you literally click on a link, and I don't even think Zoom, like now they have an extra step where you have to like, click on the link and then you get the Zoom window and you have to like check off if you want video to run or not. And then you open that up. But needless to say, 2 clicks and you're in, right? Well, in this case, yeah, it's one click and you're in the virtual world. But then if I'm like, meet me at the conference room, now it gets awkward. Like they go to my office, right, and they just walk down the hall and we've been walking our lives, right? In this case, they have to like use the arrows or the mouse to get to that conference room. And that little bit of barrier, not only, I mean, the clients thought it was so cool, like it was the best meeting they had, but our team members didn't want to go meet in the physical office, even though they were all gamers and they can get around. And we even started to distribute Oculus, and so you could walk around and physically be in another universe. I think it's one of those things. It was just before its time. We're not ready for it, but you're absolutely right. That's where it's going, right? There's there's no need to physically move somewhere when you're going to be able to have a similar in-person experience virtually. It's just not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Todd, curious your take on this idea. Keenan and I very much despise the word work-life balance. And so we often use work-life integration. As you're speaking, I hear the passion of what you've built and what you're building like ooze out of you. I'm curious your take on this idea of work-life integration and what you use or what you do to stay grounded as you're building and scaling.
Interesting. I mean, that's a great way of looking at it. I mean, I'm not opposed to work-life balance too, because the key part of that is that you have some sort of life. It's not all work, but I don't think it's the entrepreneur. So if you're an entrepreneur, there is no balance there. It's definitely integration, right? You have to do both at the same time. If you're a team member and you're working for somebody, I think it's more of a balance. You need to be able to create space and say, I'm not working now. Whereas you just don't get that luxury as an entrepreneur. So, but it was 100% work for me. Although I did raise 4 kids, and had them by myself for years and years, and so it was difficult on the family as an entrepreneur because, and you can search me up on Huffington Post. There's an article about it, but I always had to try to, do both at the same time. So it's absolutely an integration. And, I was always trying to create some space for myself. Like, when COVID hit, it was a perfect opportunity to get in more shape. And so I started mountain biking, but I'd go mountain biking and I'd still have a Zoom meeting going on. I mean, that's a beautiful thing with a set of earphones, right? Like I'd be mountain biking and it all depends. If it's a meeting I have to run, I have to be in front of a computer. If I'm not running the meeting and I just have to chime in every so often, like these days I'll be, mountain biking around the golf course or something. So, that's how I do it. But that said, I'm getting closer to 50 now, and your body really starts to hurt and your friends start to die. And so you realize I actually need to carve out time to go exercise that I'm not going to work. And so at some point you rag yourself out so much as an entrepreneur that you have that mindset like a worker where it's like, listen, I'm going to need some of my time. And I've gotten to that point now where, on a weekend, I'll say, I'm going skiing this weekend. I'm not doing email. I'll put on my autoresponder and I'll go skiing. And I'm part of a business group that in 2 weeks we'll be in Barcelona all week. And I won't, otherwise I'll be working on myself. It's training for me. It's, relationships with my peers, other CEOs. But otherwise, other than doing a bunch of email, of course, I'm not in any other business meetings. So, you finally get to that point where you're comfortable enough in your business, you're getting old enough that you have to focus on yourself, that you're not just working, your ass off 25 hours a day. I remember doing 2-3 all-nighters in a row until finally I just trashed. But, you feel like that's the only way you're going to get ahead is by working that, 25th hour in a day.
And I guess a big part of that as well is recognizing that this is not a sprint, but this is a marathon, right? And the only thing that we're really trying to accomplish is to continue to keep playing the game of entrepreneurship. And if I were to try and, hit my goals next week, I'd be making different decisions. But if I'm trying to hit my goals by the time I'm 50, as an example, I make different types of decisions, right? That help me be more sustainable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely think long-term. But, as a startup though, it's, I love the expression, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. But if you're a startup, you better bite off whole legs. Right? You can nibble a little bit once you've, at least consumed half the elephant. But That's just to get ahead of the market, to grab enough market share to get kind of, permanence.
So, Todd, we have a tradition here on the podcast. One of our previous guests wants to ask you a blind question. Okay. And their question was, if you could change one thing about the way people look at innovation today, what would it be and why?
If I could change the way that they look at innovation. So I'll speak out loud a little bit before I give you a definitive answer here. But innovation has always been, in my mind, something we heralded. Today, though, some of that innovation, like, there's a big talk of like socialism, for instance, right? And in socialism, not as much innovation goes on, right? It's more of, it devolves into a totalitarian state and stuff, and, a lot of control at government entities, unfortunately. And innovation. So I guess one thing I would want to change around innovation is for those that innovate, they've got to get their dues. They've got that incentive to innovate. You need the reward, right? So the perception I would change today about innovation is I would say, it is really important to innovate, right? And for all the right reasons. We want to innovate so we can make a better world, right? Improve humanity. Those are the reasons you innovate. But for people that innovate, they do it for an outcome. And so what I would change in the perception of innovation today is I'd say that we need to innovate. It's really important. And if you see business owners, make a lot of money, hopefully they do, like a Gates, where they generally give it all back, right? That's okay, because if we're going to have anybody injecting money into the world, somebody like Bill Gates is, a pretty good steward of that. Musk is injecting some world in some pretty funny ways, getting back into politics, and I think politics all needs to go by the wayside. But so long story long, we need to trust in innovation, and we need to reward those that do.